Rome was not destroyed by enemies at its gates. It was destroyed from within. Before Caesar crossed the Rubicon, before the legions crowned emperors, there were two brothers who dared to challenge the Senate. Their names were Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. They believed Rome could be saved by giving power back to the people. But their vision unleashed violence that had never before touched Roman politics. For the first time, blood would stain the heart of the Republic. And once that door was opened, Rome would never close it again.
The death of the Gracchi and the first cracks in the Republic. The Roman Republic, by the 2nd century before Christ, had grown into a vast power stretching across the Mediterranean. Its legions had conquered Carthage, humbled Greece, and subdued provinces from Spain to Asia Minor. From the outside, Rome seemed unshakable, a machine of discipline, order, and conquest. But within, invisible cracks were spreading across its foundations. At the heart of the Republic was a growing divide between rich and poor. The Senate, dominated by wealthy aristocrats, grew ever richer from conquests, collecting spoils and land. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens, farmers, soldiers, and laborers found themselves increasingly dispossessed. Land that once belonged to Roman families was absorbed into vast estates owned by the elite and worked by endless streams of slaves captured in war. The free Roman citizen, once proud and independent, was slowly being pushed to the margins. Into this conflict stepped two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Young, charismatic, and deeply troubled by the suffering of the poor, the Gracchi attempted something revolutionary: land reform. Tiberius, elected as tribune of the plebs in 133 BCE, proposed redistributing public land to the dispossessed. His vision was simple yet radical: to restore the dignity of the Roman farmer and to strengthen the Republic by giving land back to its citizens. But the Senate saw it differently. To them, the Gracchi threatened privilege, wealth, and the balance of power. Tiberius's reforms bypassed the Senate and appealed directly to the people, an unforgivable act in the eyes of Rome's aristocracy. What followed shocked the Republic. A mob of senators and their supporters stormed an assembly and murdered Tiberius in the very heart of Rome. It was the first time blood had spilled in the political life of the Republic. Years later, Gaius Gracchus would continue his brother's mission. He expanded the vision: grain subsidies for the poor, new colonies for settlers, reforms to limit the power of governors. But like his brother, Gaius faced bitter opposition. His enemies painted him as dangerous, an enemy of tradition, a threat to Rome itself. Eventually, cornered and abandoned by allies, Gaius was hunted down. Rather than be captured, he chose to take his own life. The deaths of the Gracchi were more than personal tragedies. They marked a turning point in Roman history. Violence had entered politics, and it would not leave. For centuries, Rome had prided itself on debate, on laws, and on compromise. But now, power was increasingly decided by force, and precedent had been broken. The Republic had crossed a threshold. It would never fully return to the stability of its past. From this moment forward, ambition, violence, and personal armies would shape its destiny. The story of Rome's fall had begun.
Rome's greatest danger did not come from foreign invaders. It came from the loyalty of its own armies. One man changed the very balance of power in the Republic. He was not a noble-born aristocrat, but a soldier of humble origins. His name was Gaius Marius, and with a single decision, he created an army that would no longer belong to Rome but to its generals.
The story of Gaius Marius is the story of a man who rose from obscurity to reshape Rome. Born into a modest family in 157 BCE, Marius had no great wealth or noble ancestry to recommend him. What he did have was ambition, iron discipline, and an unmatched gift for war. Marius and the rise of the military. Marius first distinguished himself in the service of Scipio Aemilianus, the conqueror of Carthage. His courage and toughness on campaign earned him respect from soldiers and commanders alike. In time, he built a reputation as a man who was not afraid to fight shoulder to shoulder with his men. To the common soldier, Marius was one of them. His moment came when Rome faced a series of deadly threats. In North Africa, the cunning King Jugurtha of Numidia had defied Rome for years. Roman armies struggled against his hit-and-run tactics, and corruption spread through the Senate's command. Marius was elected consul and given command. Unlike the aristocrats who had failed before him, Marius crushed Jugurtha through persistence, discipline, and alliances. For this victory, he returned to Rome a hero. But his true revolution came not on the battlefield of Africa, but in the heart of the Republic itself. Rome faced a crisis. Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and the Teutones, were sweeping across Europe and threatening Italy itself. The Republic needed soldiers, yet recruitment faltered. Only citizens with property could serve, and too many poor Romans had been pushed off their land. Marius broke tradition. He opened the legions to the capitae censi, the landless poor. For the first time in Rome's history, men without wealth or property could join the army. They were promised pay, training, and most importantly, land after their service. The consequences were immense. Thousands of desperate men flocked to the legions, willing to fight not for the Senate, but for the general who promised them a future. Marius had given Rome the manpower it needed to survive. But he had also created a dangerous new precedent: armies loyal not to the Republic, but to their commander. Victories followed. At Aquae Sextiae and Vercellae, Marius crushed the invading tribes, saving Rome from disaster. He was hailed as the third founder of Rome. Statues were raised, songs were sung, and for a time, he was the most celebrated man in the Republic. Yet success came at a price. The Senate, jealous of his popularity, grew hostile, and younger, ambitious men watched carefully. They saw what Marius had done, how one general, by controlling soldiers' loyalty, could become more powerful than the Senate itself. Among those watching was a man who would one day become Marius's bitter rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla.
For centuries, Rome's armies defended her borders. But in the age of ambition, those same legions turned inward against their own city. It was a moment no Roman could have imagined, soldiers marching not on foreign soil, but on Rome itself. And leading them was a man who believed destiny was his to seize. His name was Lucius Cornelius Sulla.
The door to military rule had been opened, and Rome would never close it again. Sulla and the First Roman Civil War. He first gained recognition during the Jugurthine War, serving under Marius himself. It was Sulla who masterminded the capture of King Jugurtha through cunning diplomacy, a victory that humiliated Marius by giving credit to his junior officer. Their rivalry began there, and it would grow into one of the most destructive conflicts the Republic had ever seen. Sulla's brilliance as a general became undeniable. In the wars against Mithridates of Pontus, a powerful king in the east, the Senate entrusted him with command. But Marius, unwilling to be overshadowed, used his influence to have the decision overturned. The command of Rome's legions, and the glory that came with it, was transferred back to Marius. For Sulla, this was intolerable. No Roman general had ever dared to defy the state, but Sulla was no ordinary general. In 88 BCE, he did the unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome. As his soldiers advanced down the sacred Via Sacra, the city was thrown into chaos. Citizens fled, senators trembled, and for the first time in history, Rome itself became a battlefield. Sulla seized the city, declared Marius an enemy, and drove him into exile. But the struggle was far from over. While Sulla fought campaigns in the east, Marius returned with his own supporters. Once again, blood flowed in the streets of Rome. Marius's men slaughtered political enemies, filling the Tiber with bodies. The Republic's laws had collapsed. What mattered now was the sword. When Sulla returned victorious from the east, he unleashed a reign of terror. Declaring himself dictator, he rewrote the constitution to favor the Senate, stripped power from the assemblies, and, most chillingly, introduced the proscriptions. These were public death lists, nailed to the forum walls. Anyone named could be killed on sight, and their property seized. Rome became a city of fear, where betrayal meant survival. Sulla believed he was restoring order, but in truth, he shattered it further. His actions proved that generals could seize Rome by force, and that armies owed loyalty not to the Republic, but to the man who led them. His dictatorship set a precedent that would echo through the lives of Pompey, Crassus, and ultimately Julius Caesar. The Republic had changed forever. What began as a rivalry between two men had unleashed a civil war, and showed Rome a future where violence, not law, would decide its fate.
For all of Rome's power, for all of its armies, its greatest fear was not always foreign kings or rival empires. Sometimes its terror came from within. It came not from patricians in the Senate, but from slaves in chains, and in 73 BC, one of those slaves would rise from the blood-soaked sands of the gladiator arena, ignite a rebellion, and shake the Republic to its core. His name was Spartacus.
Spartacus and the Gladiator Revolt. The story of Spartacus begins far from Rome. Born in Thrace, he was once a free man, trained as a soldier. But after capture, he was sold into slavery and condemned to the life of a gladiator. Day after day, he fought not for honor, but for the amusement of Roman crowds. Yet Spartacus possessed not only strength, but vision, and an unyielding will to be free. In 73 BCE, fate gave him his chance. At a gladiator school in Capua, Spartacus and about 70 companions plotted their escape. Armed with little more than kitchen knives and seized weapons, they overwhelmed their guards and broke into the countryside. What should have been a minor incident became something far greater. As they fled into the hills, others joined them. Runaway slaves, desperate peasants, men crushed under Rome's system of inequality. Within months, Spartacus commanded an army. At its height, his rebellion swelled to more than 70,000 men, a force large enough to challenge Rome's legions. This was no mob. Spartacus drilled his followers like soldiers, using tactics that baffled Roman commanders. Again and again, he defeated consular armies sent to destroy him. Entire legions were humiliated. Rome, the master of the Mediterranean, was shaken by a slave revolt. But Spartacus's war was not only military, it was symbolic. Rome's economy and power rested on slavery. Millions of men and women toiled in fields, mines, and households, building the Republic's wealth. The revolt revealed a truth that Romans preferred to ignore. Their society was built on chains. If those chains ever broke, the Republic itself could collapse. For 2 years, Spartacus outmaneuvered his enemies. His dream, it is said, was to lead his people out of Italy and back to freedom in their homelands. But divisions plagued the rebels, and the Senate finally entrusted command to Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's richest man. Crassus brought ruthless discipline, crucifying deserters, building massive fortifications, and grinding down Spartacus's forces. In 71 BCE, Spartacus met his fate in battle. Surrounded, he fought to the death, refusing to flee. His body was never found, a symbol of his defiance. But Rome made certain his memory carried terror. 6,000 of his followers were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies lining the road as a grim warning to any who might dream of rebellion. Though Spartacus was gone, the shock of his revolt lingered. Rome had crushed the slaves, but in doing so, it revealed its own fragility. And in the aftermath, 2 ambitious men, Crassus and Pompey, would step forward as the new masters of Roman politics.
Rome had crushed Spartacus. The Republic stood victorious, but the victory was not the Senate's, it belonged to men. Men with ambition, men who saw that power no longer flowed from tradition or law, but from legions and loyalty. In the ashes of the slave revolt, 2 giants emerged: Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, and Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus Pompey the Great, the Republic's golden general. And soon, a younger, hungrier man would join them. His name was Julius Caesar. Together, they would reshape Rome not through ideals, but through raw ambition.
The defeat of Spartacus left Rome in uneasy triumph. Crassus, who had crushed the rebellion with brutal efficiency, expected glory. Yet Pompey, returning from campaigns in Spain, claimed equal credit, declaring that while Crassus had ended the war, he himself had plucked the last feathers from the eagle. Their rivalry was immediate. Pompey had already built a legend. A brilliant commander in his 20s, he fought pirates in the Mediterranean, subdued Spain, and crushed the remnants of Mithridates in the east. His soldiers adored him, and his victories made him Rome's most celebrated general. But he lacked one thing: political legitimacy. Pompey often demanded power before holding proper office, relying on his fame and legions to force the Senate's hand. Crassus, by contrast, was the Senate's master of wealth. Ruthless in business, he controlled mines, land, and even fire brigades, exploiting disasters to buy property at ruinous prices. His money bought influence, but his hunger was for military glory, the one prize his immense fortune could not purchase outright. Between them stood tension, yet both knew Rome's politics were breaking. The Senate was divided, the populares and optimates at each other's throats, and violence had become routine. In such chaos, alliances mattered more than principles. And then came Caesar. Born into a patrician family but aligned with the populares, Caesar was ambitious, charming, and dangerously clever. He cultivated the people with lavish games, seduced allies with debts and favors, and built networks that reached across Rome. Unlike Pompey and Crassus, Caesar possessed neither unmatched wealth nor unrivaled victories, yet he saw how to wield both men's ambitions for his own rise. By 60 BCE, the three struck a bargain history would remember as the First Triumvirate. Each man offered what the others lacked. Crassus brought money, Pompey brought soldiers and prestige, and Caesar brought political skill. Together they dominated the Republic, bending laws and offices to their will. For a moment, it seemed Rome had three masters, but beneath the alliance, ambition seethed. Pompey longed for recognition above all men. Crassus burned for conquest to equal his rival. And Caesar dreamed of something greater still. In this fragile union, the Republic was no longer governed by Senate and people, but by personalities too great to be contained. And it was only a matter of time before one man would seize all.
It began as a governorship, a 5-year posting on the frontier of Rome. To the Senate, it was routine. To Caesar, it was destiny. Gaul, a land of forests, rivers, and fierce tribes. A land rich in resources, brimming with warriors. A land where one man could build not only an army, but a legend, and in less than a decade. Julius Caesar would turn Gaul into a Roman province, turn his soldiers into a brotherhood, and turn himself into the most dangerous man in the Republic.
In 58 BCE, Caesar left Rome to govern Cisalpine and Transalpine Gaul, along with Illyricum. On paper, it was a provincial command, meant to keep him away from the intrigues of the city. In reality, it gave him control of 4 legions, and the chance to expand his authority through conquest. Almost immediately, Caesar found his stage. The Helvetii, a migrating tribe, attempted to cross Roman territory. With calculated speed, Caesar blocked their path and forced them into battle. The Helvetii were crushed, their migration halted, and Caesar proclaimed himself protector of Roman lands. But this was only the beginning. Over the next 8 years, Caesar waged a relentless series of campaigns across Gaul. He defeated the Suebi under Ariovistus, drove back Germanic incursions, and subdued dozens of tribes. Each victory was carefully recorded by Caesar himself in his Commentari de Bello Gallico. His writings were not merely reports. They were propaganda, crafted to present him as Rome's savior and a general of unmatched brilliance. Caesar's methods were ruthless. He employed engineering on an astonishing scale, building bridges across the Rhine in days to terrify the Germans, and launching daring invasions across the Channel into Britain. The first Roman commander ever to do so. He used diplomacy, turning tribes against each other, and brutality, annihilating entire populations when resistance was fierce. But Gaul did not submit easily. The tribes rose in revolt under a charismatic leader, Vercingetorix of the Arverni. He united the Gauls in a desperate struggle for freedom. Caesar faced his greatest test at the Siege of Alesia in 52 BCE. Outnumbered, Caesar encircled the fortress with vast fortifications, building walls both to trap the defenders and to hold off relieving forces. For weeks, Rome and Gaul clashed in a battle of endurance. At last, the Gauls broke. Vercingetorix, proud and defiant, rode out to surrender. His defeat marked the end of Gallic independence and the crowning glory of Caesar's career. By 50 BCE, Caesar controlled all of Gaul. His legions were battle-hardened, loyal to him personally, and rich with plunder. In Rome, he was hailed by the people but feared by the Senate. For Caesar, Gaul was more than a conquest. It was the foundation of empire. For with Gaul secure, he was no longer merely a politician or a general. He was something far more dangerous, a man with an army devoted to him, and a future that pointed toward absolute power.
It was a river no wider than 100 feet, a shallow stream winding through northern Italy. Yet when Caesar's horse splashed into its waters on a cold night in 49 BC, the fate of the Roman Republic changed forever. To cross the Rubicon was treason, but to turn back was ruin. And so, with a single step, Caesar gambled everything and plunged Rome into civil war.
By 50 BCE, Caesar was the most powerful man in Rome, though he stood far from the city itself. His conquest of Gaul had won him unimaginable wealth, the devotion of his legions, and the admiration of the people. Yet in the Senate, fear grew. Many saw Caesar not as a servant of the Republic, but as a tyrant in waiting. Pompey, once Caesar's ally in the First Triumvirate, had drifted into opposition. With Crassus dead in Parthia, the alliance was broken. Pompey now aligned himself with the Senate, conservatives, the optimates, who demanded that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. But Caesar knew the stakes. Without his legions, he would face prosecution, humiliation, perhaps even death. His enemies would not forgive his rise, nor the power he had amassed. To surrender was to end his career, and his life. In January 49 BCE, the Senate, under Pompey's influence, issued the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final decree, branding Caesar an enemy of the state if he refused to step down. The choice was stark: submit to the Senate or defy it. Caesar chose defiance. Leading his 13th Legion south, he reached the Rubicon, the legal boundary between his province and Italy proper. Roman law was clear. No general could cross that river with an army. To do so was rebellion. Legend says Caesar paused on the bank, uncertain. Then, as dawn broke, he rode into the water, uttering the words, "Alea iacta est." The die is cast. With that act, he declared war not only on Pompey, but on the very Republic itself. Panic swept Rome. Pompey and the Senate, unprepared for Caesar's speed, fled the city for Greece, leaving Italy undefended. Caesar advanced swiftly, seizing the treasury, the institutions of state, and the loyalty of the masses. The streets rang not with protests, but with cheers. For many, Caesar was the champion who would bring order where the Senate had brought chaos. But civil war was now inevitable. The Republic was divided, not between Rome and her enemies, but between Romans themselves. Brother would fight brother, legions against legions, in a struggle that would decide whether Rome's future lay with the Senate or with a single man. After crossing the Rubicon, Caesar's advance was swift. Pompey and the Senate had fled to Greece, leaving Italy undefended. In mere months, Caesar controlled the city of Rome, the treasury, and the machinery of government. But power on paper was not enough. Real victory required confronting Pompey. Pompey was no ordinary opponent. For decades, he had commanded Rome's armies, crushed pirates, and expanded the Republic's dominion. His legions in the east numbered in the tens of thousands, and he enjoyed the Senate's full support. To many, it seemed inevitable that Pompey would triumph over the upstart Caesar. The first major clash came not in Italy, but in Greece. Caesar, short of ships, risked a daring crossing with a portion of his army. His men were exhausted, underfed, and heavily outnumbered. Yet their loyalty never wavered. Where other generals commanded through fear, Caesar inspired through charisma, sharing his soldiers' hardships, speaking to them as comrades, not pawns. At Dyrrhachium in 48 BCE, Pompey struck first. He outmaneuvered Caesar, nearly encircling him. For a moment, Caesar faced disaster, but Pompey, cautious and reluctant to gamble everything, allowed his enemy to escape. It was a mistake he would not have the chance to repeat. Later that same year, the two armies met on the plains of Pharsalus in central Greece. But Caesar's genius lay not in numbers, but in discipline. He anticipated Pompey's tactics, placing reserves to counter his cavalry, and inspiring his men with fiery speeches. When the battle began, Pompey's horsemen charged, expecting to crush Caesar's flank. Instead, Caesar's reserves struck with precision, driving them back in chaos. From that moment, the tide turned. Caesar's legions pressed forward with relentless discipline, breaking Pompey's line. Panic spread through his ranks. What had begun as a show of Senate superiority collapsed into disaster. Pompey fled the battlefield, abandoning his soldiers and his honor. Caesar, victorious against overwhelming odds, now stood unrivaled. The Senate's champion was in flight, and the Republic lay within Caesar's grasp. But the war was not yet finished. Pompey sought refuge in Egypt, hoping for sanctuary. Instead, he met betrayal, cut down by assassins before Caesar's arrival. When Caesar reached Alexandria and gazed upon the severed head of his former ally, he is said to have wept, not only for Pompey, but for the Republic they had both destroyed. When Pompey fled after Pharsalus, he sought refuge in Egypt. The kingdom, rich and ancient, was ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Alexander the Great's generals. But Egypt was in turmoil. The young king, Ptolemy X, reigned uneasily, while his sister Cleopatra was locked in a bitter struggle for the throne. Pompey expected sanctuary. Instead, Ptolemy's advisors, fearing Caesar's wrath, chose betrayal. They murdered Pompey on the shores of Egypt and presented his severed head to Caesar upon his arrival in Alexandria. Far from rejoicing, Caesar wept. Though Pompey had been his enemy, he had also been Rome's greatest general, and his death at foreign hands dishonored the Republic. Caesar soon found himself drawn into Egypt's dynastic conflict. Ptolemy's court was divided, chaos filled the streets of Alexandria, and the question of who should rule threatened the kingdom's stability. Then, in one of history's most enduring images, Cleopatra made her entrance. Legend says she had herself smuggled into Caesar's palace, rolled inside a carpet or linen sack, and unwrapped before him. Whether myth or truth, the gesture revealed her daring. Cleopatra was young, brilliant, and charismatic. She spoke multiple languages, mastered diplomacy, and understood the art of spectacle. Caesar, captivated, chose to back her claim. The decision sparked war. Ptolemy's forces clashed with Caesar's legion in the heart of Alexandria. Streets burned, ships were set aflame in the harbor, and even parts of the great library were consumed by fire. In brutal urban combat, Caesar held his ground, and at last Ptolemy III was defeated, drowning in the Nile as he tried to escape. With victory secured, Cleopatra was restored to the throne, ruling jointly with her younger brother, though in truth she now stood as Egypt's true sovereign. And beside her stood Caesar, not as conqueror, but as ally and lover. Their union shocked Rome. Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, and the image of the Roman dictator entwined with a foreign queen unsettled the Senate. To many, it seemed a dangerous sign. Caesar was no longer bound by the traditions of the Republic, but driven by a vision that reached beyond Italy, beyond Rome itself, to empire. When Caesar finally departed Egypt, he left behind more than a queen and a child. He left a bond between Rome and Egypt that would echo for generations, and a scandal that would fuel his enemies, fears that the Republic was dying, and a monarchy was rising in its place. In 46 BCE, Julius Caesar returned to Rome. His victories had made him master of the known world. From the Senate to the streets, there was no doubt, Caesar was unrivaled. Yet the Republic had always been a delicate balance, its power divided among magistrates and assemblies. Now, for the first time, that balance bent entirely toward one man. To celebrate his triumph, Caesar held not one, but 4 grand triumphal processions. They honored his victories in Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa. The streets of Rome filled with parades, exotic animals, prisoners of war, and vast spoils. Caesar's enemies marched in chains. His allies rode beside him in glory. Rome had never seen such magnificence, but beneath the spectacle lurked unease. For centuries, Rome had hated kings. The very memory of monarchy haunted the Republic, and yet Caesar seemed more like a king than a consul. He was declared dictator, first for 10 years, then effectively for life. His image appeared on coins, statues rose in his honor. His birthday was celebrated like a festival. Caesar himself embraced reforms with astonishing speed. He restructured debts, reformed the calendar into the Julian system still echoed today, and granted citizenship more widely than ever before. He planned massive building projects, drained swamps, and dreamed of campaigns eastward against Parthia. In vision and scale, he was thinking not as a Roman statesman, but as an emperor in all but name. Yet Caesar's genius was also his downfall. His generosity won him popular support, but his concentration of power bred fear. Senators whispered that the Republic was dead. Rumors spread that Caesar intended to make himself king, to take a crown and rule not as dictator, but as monarch. In one famous scene, during a public festival, Mark Antony offered Caesar a diadem, the symbol of kingship. The crowd gasped. Caesar refused once, then again, declaring he wanted no crown. Yet to many, the gesture confirmed what they feared most, that he desired absolute rule. Even among his allies, unease grew. To the common people, Caesar was the champion of Rome, the man who had given them bread, land, and spectacle. To the Senate, he was a tyrant in waiting. And in the shadowed halls of the Curia, men began to plot. Senators who had once called Caesar friend now sharpened their daggers. The Republic, they believed, could be saved only through blood. By 45 BCE, Caesar stood at the height of his power. The Republic bowed before him, and yet, for all his triumphs, fear grew in the Senate. The title of dictator for life was more than a political role. It was, to many, the death knell of liberty. The opposition centered on two men, Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Cassius had long opposed Caesar, bitter over Pompey's defeat. But Brutus was different. He was respected, descended from the very Brutus who had helped expel Rome's last king centuries before. Caesar trusted him deeply, even treating him like a son. That trust would make Brutus the most tragic figure of all. Whispers of conspiracy spread. Meetings were held in secret villas and private chambers, lit by oil lamps, their voices hushed against the echoing marble. They spoke of honor, of duty, of saving the Republic. Yet beneath their noble words lay ambition, jealousy, and fear. Caesar's reforms, his statues, his crowns, his refusal to step aside, all seemed to point toward kingship. To Romans, the word rex, king, was poison. The Republic had been built on the hatred of monarchy. And so, to many senators, Caesar's death was not betrayal. It was salvation. As weeks passed, more joined the conspiracy. 60 senators in all, from veterans of Pompey's cause to former allies of Caesar himself. Even men who had once marched with him across Gaul now raised their hands against him. But still, doubt lingered. Could the Republic survive without Caesar? Could his death truly restore freedom? Or would it plunge Rome into chaos? Brutus wrestled with these questions, torn between loyalty and legacy. His ancestors had ended a monarchy. Now the Senate demanded he do the same. Rumors began to leak. Friends warned Caesar that danger was near. Prophecies and omens spread. A soothsayer famously warned him, "Beware the Ides of March." Yet Caesar, confident and perhaps blinded by pride, dismissed the threats. He trusted the Senate. He trusted Brutus. But in the hearts of his enemies, the decision was made. The Curia of Pompey would become the stage. The daggers were ready. Rome itself held its breath. On the morning of March 15th, 44 BCE, Julius Caesar prepared to attend a session of the Senate. His wife, Calpurnia, had been troubled by terrible dreams. She begged him not to go, speaking of omens, comets in the sky, strange noises in the night, visions of blood. Caesar hesitated, but pride won over caution. The Senate awaited him, and Caesar would not show fear. As he approached the Curia of Pompey, a crowd gathered. Among them stood the soothsayer who had once warned him, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar passed by and, with a wry smile, said, "The Ides of March have come." The seer replied, "Aye, Caesar, but not yet gone." Inside the chamber, the conspirators waited. Brutus, Cassius, and more than 60 senators had hidden daggers beneath their togas. When Caesar entered, he was greeted warmly, invited to sit upon his golden chair. For a moment, all seemed calm. Then, the signal was given. A senator approached with a petition, tugging at Caesar's robes. As he leaned forward to refuse, the first blade struck. Caesar staggered, stunned, as another blow followed, and another. The chamber erupted in chaos as senators surrounded him, slashing with their knives. Caesar fought back at first, striking out with his stylus, but the assault was overwhelming. Blood splattered across marble, onto statues, across the robes of Rome's most powerful men. And then, the final wound. Turning, Caesar saw Brutus among the attackers. The man he trusted most, the man he loved like a son. Ancient writers record his final words, whispered in shock and grief. "Et tu, Brute?" "You too, Brutus?" With that, he ceased his struggle. Covering his face with his toga, Caesar fell at the base of Pompey's statue, as if fate demanded one conqueror die at the feet of another. 23 stab wounds marked his body. Rome's greatest general lay dead. The conspirators, their blades dripping with blood, raised their arms and cried out, "Liberty is restored." But outside, the streets were silent. The people had not asked for Caesar's death. To them, the senators had not saved the Republic. They had murdered its champion. The Ides of March, meant to free Rome, would
The
instead
Republic had
plunge it into
fallen.
darkness.
Julius Caesar stood as the unchallenged ruler of Rome, hailed as a hero by the people. and feared as a tyrant by the Senate. In just a few short years, the ideals that had guided Rome for centuries, liberty, tradition, and shared power, had been replaced by the will of a single man. But history was not finished with Caesar. His triumph would set the stage for betrayal, a blade in the dark, and the birth of something even greater, an empire that would shape the world for 1,000 years. This was the end of the Republic and the dawn of the Roman Empire. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell to join Chronidex, where every week we uncover another chapter of humanity's forgotten past.